And a good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Issues and Attitudes on this Monday, December 23rd, time of taping. We're today going to talk about the women's suffrage movement. And in studio, Carolyn Cloyd and Steve Thompson. Welcome.
Thank you.
Glad to be here.
Pull that mic up to you, Steve. I got to be able to hear that deep voice, all right? Well, first of all, thanks for coming in just 2 days before Christmas.
Well, thanks for inviting us.
We do appreciate it. And I always like to start out for the people who just do not know what is, or what was, and is, how's the proper word that be, was?
Is women's suffrage.
Yeah, okay.
Or was,
yeah.
I guess.
So what was women's suffrage? What is it? And we'll go into details after that.
So specifically, women's suffrage was women getting the right to vote. So, I mean, it was a whole movement, women's rights, but suffrage itself was about getting the right to vote.
So what led you, and I guess I should say there's going to be an exhibit in Mattoon coming up in March, and we'll get to that in a little bit, but I guess what led both of you to say this is something we need to do for the citizens of Coles County and the area?
Well, actually, I was approached by Wells Fargo associates here in Mattoon and Charleston, and they'd been in Louisville at some kind of corporate meeting down there or whatever. And along the riverfront in Louisville, there's still it's a museum now, but it was a slave auction house. And they were promoting that in downtown Louisville with boards, poster boards in some of the commercial businesses there. And I'll about bet you that part of Wells Fargo had something to do with that too. And they came back to me and asked me, hey, Steve, can we do something like that here that's got some kind of diversity angle on it or whatever? And since we weren't involved in the slave trade and everything that was going on in antebellum and the Civil War, I said, well, 100-year anniversary for the women getting the right to vote is surfacing here next year. And they thought that would be a good program for us to undertake. And basically, we thought it'd be great to have an exhibit and some satellite programs to go along with that. And I don't know, for the past 6 months, Carolyn and I have been working on this, doing research and trying to develop that.
Talk about the primary presentation and how it's going to happen and the when, where's, and whys of that.
Well, the primary presentation is going to take place at the Coles County Historical Society's galleries at the train station in Mattoon, the lower levels for those of you that haven't been down there on the boarding area level. And we're going to have an exhibit that basically traces, we sort of set the date of 1848 is when this all started, up through 1920 when the 19th Amendment was passed, and they achieved their right to vote. So we're going to have that exhibit down there. We were going to do some other programs, but didn't pan out. But we're going to interpret this and take our angle on not only the national effort, but the statewide effort and the local effort that took place on this too.
And it's going to be up there a while, almost all of 10 months of the year?
Yeah, we're going to take it from March 1st through 31 December of next year.
So wow, it'll still be up a year from now. Mm-hmm. Carolyn, what about your angle? What made you think this is something I want to do? And if you're watching on your 13 or WEIU, she has the votes for women sash on?
Sash
yes,
on, yeah. So I love history to begin with, and when Steve asked me if I wanted to help with this project, honestly, it just was so exciting because being a woman, this is exciting to me, so yes.
That's cool. Who are the other people involved that have helped you put this together? And I know it's not you two. You talked about you did a lot of research, so who are the principals involved that kind of got us to this thing opening in just about 60 days?
Well, truthfully, it's just been pretty much me and Carolyn. We've been getting some assistance from the principal officers with the Coles County Historical Society, but there's some subcontractors, if you want to call them that are working with us on this, but basically it's been me and Carolyn doing the research and using our creative abilities to try and put this all together.
So you're also creating the actual exhibit items too then, between the two of you?
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it, I guess the best way to envision this is it's going to be pretty much if you were going to an art gallery and taking a look at, paintings on the walls or statues or whatever. It's going to be something along those lines as far as the presentation goes. And we're still, one of the problems, and we'll make an appeal right now with this, is we've been looking for artifacts. And we thought there would have been a couple of repositories here in Coles County that would have had diaries or suffragette pins or pennants or gear, and we struck out totally on that. So once again, we'll make an appeal to anybody that has any first-person accounts, like diaries or journals that their great-grandmother may have been involved in this or whatever. We'd like to take a look at that. Plus, if there's anybody that's got any of this memorabilia, we'd like to use that to put on display in there too.
Just get old Steve or Carolyn for that. Now, Carolyn, you were telling me off mic before we started, when this thing was going through, there was a local woman who had some involvement from Arthur.
There was. She was one of the leaders, particularly in Illinois. Her name was Ella Stewart. She was born in Arthur, and her last name, I don't know exactly how to pronounce it. It's S-E-A-S-S, Sace. That was her maiden name.
Yeah.
But she married a gentleman named Stewart when she went to Eureka College. But she was very instrumental in the whole movement. So.
And have you learned anything else about her in the past, or is there details? A little tease or something?
She actually came to Mattoon a couple of times. So there's that. But she was very instrumental in the movement. There were a lot of women. There were other people that came here. They gave these speeches on their auto tour from the back seat of a car on 17th Street in Mattoon. So that's exciting. But Ella Stewart is of particular interest because she was born locally.
One of the things I didn't think about is that a lot of the suffragettes, they dressed up in these outfits, for a better way for me to say it, is what's the story behind that? Why is that to garner attention, or?
Well, they weren't really outfits. I mean, that was just the fashion of the day.
Okay.
But the fashion, early on, the women tried to dress in bloomers because they didn't want to dress in the traditional, with the corsets that were very uncomfortable and unhealthy, and they were wanting to, dress more fittingly for the things they wanted to do, but they were laughed at. And then they decided that what they really wanted to do was they wanted to show people treated these women like they were insane, like they were just lunatics, and that they, were just women who couldn't find men, and so they decided to dress up in very tailored outfits to show them we're intelligent women, we're, professional, and it was just they wanted to project this aura of this is what, this is who we are. We're not insane, and we're not.
We just want to vote.
Yeah, we really just want to vote. Yes.
Steve, what do you think you want the people to take away from this exhibit, when they start visiting in March of next year?
Well, I think the first thing, if I personally had no knowledge of this context and anything, I think what people will take away is, good God, I can't believe this. This was 100 years ago, and we were limiting the civic rights of people, based upon gender. And that's developed over the 245 years or so that we've been a country, or even before that in colonial times. But I think people would walk away as they go through there and say, God, I can't believe that they limited people's rights in this manner, just 200 years ago or whatever.
And you said the movement,
less than 200 years ago.
And the movement started in the late 1840s, and it took to 1919 for the amendment to get amendment.
Well, 20 is when it was ratified. But, it was, the story sort of fascinated me because I was thinking this is going to be a lot of lobbying, petitioning type stuff that was going to take place. And I think you see that through the first couple of segments. I've divided this context into 3 segments. But when you get to the 1900 to the 1920 era, that's when they became radical. They started using what we would consider militant tactics and street tactics and stuff that accomplished exactly what they wanted. They wanted the attention of the press. They wanted the attention of the audience that was the citizens of the United States, and they got it. And that's one of the reasons that they were able to push that through in the 19-teens.
Anything stand out that you give us an example of that just you were like wowed by?
Well, I think that there's 2 people that I'm particularly attached to in this are Alice Paul, and Lucy Burns. And these were 20-somethings in the 1900s. And they got involved in activism in England and brought that here. And it was a militant, you heard me mention beforehand when we were talking to this Emil Pankhurst, and they used things like hunger strikes and manipulated the press, and this was in the UK, and they brought that back to this country. And when they brought it back to the organizations that had been 50 years or 40 years, the women's suffrage organizations, they were shocked by, what these two were proposing. And it was others that were attached to them too. But they really stand out to me as the ones that got everybody's attention. And
I differ on that a little. I think it's those women.
Oh, good, we have strife.
Well,
That's good.
I think it's those women early on, from 1848. These were women who had no rights. I mean, they had absolutely no rights. And when they stood up and just said, well, when I marry, I don't want to give up the right to my property and give it to my husband, that was so shocking. And just these women were just clearly insane. I mean, they started from ground zero there. They had no rights, and I think it was all that slogging along that they went through. It's sort of over time, at first people thought, well, this is not right, and these women are crazy, and over time, as they just kept on and kept on and kept on, I think people became a little more open to the idea of, okay, well, maybe they should have some rights, and maybe, and then these other women came along. But I think if Alice Paul had done that in 1848, they probably would have just drawn and quartered her.
They'd have probably put her in an asylum. But
it all worked together. Quite frankly, they all came around, and Alice Paul came in at the right time.
Well, let's then go to the 19 teens when the movement to get that amendment, and was building. I mean, who were some of the men who kind of said, "Hey, we need to do this"? Were there instrumental people in American history that took?
There have been men attached to this movement from the get-go.
Okay.
Sometimes the organizations would exclude the men's membership in their organizations, but
Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, Frederick Douglass was a lot of these suffragettes, if you want to call them that, the women, came from the abolitionist program or the abolitionist movement back then in the early part of the 19th century. And that's one of the things that strikes me, too, is a lot of them came from the abolitionist movement. And then you had, later on, the Women's Christian Temperance Union, which was the prohibitionist. And it seemed to me they were always sort of playing second fiddle to abolition or prohibition or whatever. And when they would break off, they would lose funding. They would lose influence in the legislative bodies throughout the country and stuff because they'd break off. But I don't know. They just seem to. And in the one of the things I wanted to point out was right after the Civil War, when they were sort of in a quagmire. You've got Wyoming and Utah around 1870. Getting the vote for women out there. And one of the things that I thought was they're out there in the West, settled in the West, standing side by men when they're out there driving all the cattle in a snowstorm or whatever. And they didn't have the differences that seem to exist on the East Coast and in New England, this caste system, if you want to call it, between men and women. It didn't seem to exist out West, and that's why a lot of the Western states got at least partial suffrage long before the 19th Amendment took place.
It's interesting. I always like what people learn when they're doing that. What about you, Carolyn? Another thing that's not what you...
I was just going to say, there was one man from Mattoon, Edward Poorman. He was a state rep, and I don't know how instrumental he was. He got a lot of press, but that's probably because he was the editor-in-chief of the Mattoon Commercial Star. But he became a state rep, and he did vote for women's suffrage when they voted on that in 1913 here in Illinois. So, and then he used that in his campaign ads. I was always for the women's suffrage movement, and so. But he was recognized by the Illinois Equal Suffrage Association. So,
let's go back to the exhibit. Other things that people can expect from the exhibit. You said you had it marked in 3 different.
Yeah, we broke the national context, or if you want, the whole context, into 3 different periods. 48 through the Civil War, and then the Civil War through the end of the century, and then 19-aughts, teens to get it the rest of the way. It's just seemed, and it could have been 10 years, like 1890 to 1920 or whatever, but that's how we broke it down. Activities here locally really didn't seem to surface until 1910 or a little bit before that, maybe 08, 05, when you'd start seeing stuff in the Journal-Gazette or the Charleston Daily News or whatever. But there was... Matilda Fletcher was an orator in the 1870s that traveled the Midwest pretty much and given long speeches and stuff. And she was here in Mattoon at the Dole Opera House giving a big speech. But anyway, for us around here, it really didn't get off the ground. It didn't seem until about 1910. And that's when statewide activists got really hot to trot. So Illinois could at least get a suffrage bill. And they did in 1913, as Carolyn mentioned. They were the first state east of the Mississippi to enfranchise women to vote and stuff.
But not completely. They still can vote for governor or any legislators, state or federal, but they could for president and municipal.
So when the 19th Amendment became law, what was the first big vote after that? Was that the 1920 election?
Yeah, well, what they saw, because it was inevitable, when they got partial suffrage and the 1916 elections came along because they could vote for president, the Illinois politicians stood up and took notice, because there was, like, in Chicago alone, there was 265,000 more votes, and that was because of the women. And if they were having to deal with that kind of electorate out there, they sort of drifted towards, oh God, we got to pay attention to this now, or whatever. And it really helped define, since you had such a big community population-wise as Chicago, nationwide, all the politicians looked at it and went, hey, this is inevitable, we better get on the bandwagon. So that helped push them forward too.
And the country was going through a war at that same time, right? And so how did that impact some of the thought process? And you did some of your research about, here you had a government at war, but they were also had this gigantic amendment to...
Well, the women, that would have been real active, the National Women's Party, which would have been the Alice Pauls and stuff, and even the National American Women's Suffrage Association, which was the other big organization at that time. That organization got behind the war effort and sort of said, hey, we'll put suffrage aside, to help this. But National Women's Party said, we don't care. We're pushing forward with this. So they were called traitors.
So women were persistent back then, too, is what you're saying?
They were called...
I'm in trouble now.
They were called traitors. They were, equated to the Kaiser. They were just... put down by the anti-suffrage people out there.
Is there something that you both think, and we may have answered this already, but I just want to make sure I catch it, that as you've done your research and you get this exhibit ready that's opening in 60 days or so at the Mattoon Depot, that you were just absolutely floored that you had no idea that this was going to be something that you just didn't know? Is there one part out there, a nugget of history that is just amazed you?
I guess the length of this struggle.
It was almost
an
8 years?
interesting little tidbit is it was 72 years from when the Declaration was signed to Seneca Falls, which was the first women's convention, and then it was 72 more years until they got the right to vote. And I mean, it's not like I thought that this happened in a couple of years, but I guess I just didn't realize that these women were working on this, struggling with it so early on.
Some of them for a whole lifetime, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, there was a whole generation of women that never even saw the right to vote, and others like the Alice Pauls came in, and some of these women, their daughters took on the struggle. So
yeah, there were 3 generations, about 4, that it took to get this done. So, and as Carolyn said, a lot of them didn't live to see this. Many of the principals fell short by 5-10 years.
Oh man. After the amendment was passed, did anybody track, or who was the first woman to actually cast a vote? Is that person?
Not then, but
have you
what
learned?
I did find out is the first person, first woman that was allowed to vote in this country was in 1756, in, I think it was someplace in Massachusetts. Name was Lydia Taft, and Lydia was allowed to vote in town meetings, or probably council meetings there. And then some other states, New Jersey and Kentucky, had laws right after, during Revolutionary War period or whatever, that allowed women to vote. But those all got repealed at some point in the early part of the 19th century.
Yeah, the women in New Jersey, it was 1776 to 1807. Interestingly enough, though,
the history buff over here.
You had to be worth 50 pounds. And so married women couldn't vote at all, because once they married, they no longer could own property. So single women could vote until 1807 in New Jersey, but not married women.
Oh, wow. Learned a lot so far. Let's go back to the exhibit a little bit. What do you say goals for the exhibit, or what do you want out of it? Or, I mean, obviously education, just some of the stuff we talked about today is amazing, but is there specific goals that you want to see out of this Mattoon exhibit?
Well, I think it's a great context to present before the community, and this all relates to personal interpretation or education. And I think if people come and take a look at this, if they know nothing about this and have any kind of curiosity about social reform, civil rights in this country, I think this will shine some new light on a context that they may not even consider before.
And I always liked history in school, and I don't remember reading that much about this or learning that much about it.
You generally just get the impression it's sort of the early 20th century, and boom, then they got the right to vote, and there was Susan B. Anthony. I mean, that was pretty much what I learned.
That was my thought going into it, to the last couple of days of doing some research. Are you going to talk to the local schools to try to get them involved at the grade school level, or the high school or junior high in Mattoon, Charleston, anywhere?
Always when we do these things, whether it be that Civil War project or whatever we're doing, we get invited to come and speak to all the service organizations and stuff. We haven't approached Unit District 2 or Charleston School District on any of this, but I'm certain that Carolyn and I are capable of getting up there and giving the kids a PowerPoint or whatever. But I think that it would be much more impressive for them to visit and tour that place and hear the context and listen to the docents that are there, give them insight into this context.
Okay. Obviously, the Me Too movement's been going on for the last, I don't know, year and a half, 2 years. Time always kind of eludes me when I start thinking about it. Have you found correlations to what's happening now to the vote? And it's probably worked for Carolyn, I think. But
well, I think there's definitely a correlation. You know, all those women that first started the movement in 1848. I mean, they were talking just your very basic rights, owning property. They wanted to loosen divorce laws, not because they necessarily wanted to get divorced, but a woman back then, if she was married to some man who was just a drunk who beat her, she couldn't do anything about it. And if she did leave him, she had to leave her kids with him. I mean, we were talking about just basic rights. And so you move forward those 72 years, they get the right to vote. But of course, you know, change anywhere is slow. And you still are looking at women facing equal pay for equal work type issues, and the Me Too issue. I guess the time was just right for women to just say, I've had enough of this whole sexual harassment thing. We're done with it, and the time was right. So I see correlation, yes.
Okay. We got about 3 or 4 minutes left. We're talking to Carolyn Cloyd and Steve Thompson about the women's suffrage and the exhibit that'll be at the train depot in Mattoon starting on March 1st. Don't want to leave anything out. So, Steve, I know you're big into this, and Carolyn too. Anything I've forgotten that you make sure that we get the information out today?
No, I just encourage everybody to come. I suspect that we're going to have some kind of opening on, I think March 1st is a Sunday, so we'll do an opening over there, so that'll be a big whoop-de-doo, I guess. But I would just suggest that people take a look at some of the context, you know, that we've brought this up now, and your audience out there, if they're interested in this, go in there and review on the internet and review some of this context. and bring that general knowledge with you when you come over there. And I'm certain there's going to be some suffragist or some part of this context that it's going to kick in with them.
The wow factor. I love the wow factor, yeah. And again, Steve was also saying, if anybody has any information, literature, pens, papers from that era, just get a hold of one of these two, or if you know me, call me and I'll get you in touch with them and go from there. Carolyn, same question. Anything that we forgot that you want to make sure you get the information out?
This is just a small aspect, but just celebrating the 100th anniversary is great. But I think that, for a woman like me, I've always had the right to vote. Sometimes you just don't think about what came before, and this is an extraordinary, despite the fact we're doing it, this is still an extraordinary thing for our community to have this display is going to be going on. This is the time for people to come in there and take a look at it and see what women's suffrage, and suffrage for all people, really. This is about human rights. See what this was all about.
All right, so that is a good answer there. We'll leave it at that, and we'll ask some unrelated questions since the holidays. But again, March 1st it opens. The Coles County, or the Mattoon Train Depot, the Women's Suffrage Movement, and Carolyn Cloyd and Steve Thompson are the two curators of this project. So we're excited and we appreciate they coming in. Let's switch now to some unrelated fun questions as we head to the holidays. Christmas dinner. What's the main course you're going to have, Steve? Then Carolyn. What do you have?
Well, I don't know. I guess it would be the traditional ham.
Turkey.
Okay. Favorite reindeer name of the world famous reindeers?
Bonkers, isn't he one of them? No. I have to go with Rudolph, because I stole his nose.
There you go.
I do like Rudolph too.
Okay. Favorite snack for the holidays? Everybody likes a snack. We all cheat on our diets over the holidays. Anything that?
Turkey.
I like fudge.
All right. This is a different one. Most famous person you've ever met? Anybody can.
Gosh.
Bill Clinton.
Bill Clinton.
I can't even think of anyone. Steve Thompson.
Oh, God.
This is one that we've been talking about a lot on social media as well here at WEIU. Eggnog lover or not?
Not.
I've never had it.
You've never
I hate
tried?
to say it.
Wow.
Do you have some back there?
Oh, no, but I love it. But it's just people just don't. It's one of those hate or love things. So it's interesting. Is there a Christmas song that you love to hear every year? So,
Christmas in Hollis.
Oh, good man there. Run DMC.
Christmas song by Nat King Cole.
That's good. All right. What about a Christmas movie? Is there a Christmas movie when it's on, you got to watch a little bit of it or all of it?
It's a Wonderful Life, Holiday Inn, Miracle on 34th Street. I could go on.
You're the oldies with the goodies, huh?
I am a classic movie fan.
A Wonderful Life.
There you go. That's a good one. So, okay, well, we'll move on. New Year's. Any big plans for the new year? Any goals and things like that as we head out of here?
And we're still going to be working on this exhibit.
On New Year's Eve.
I want to go dancing. All my friends now are like, I want to be at home in bed by 10. I'm like, I want to go dancing. I'm not dead yet.
Well, somebody asked Carolyn out for dancing on New Year's Eve. There we go. So thank you for coming in on this couple days before Christmas. It's great to see Carolyn Cloyd and Steve Thompson of Mattoon. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thanks.
Everybody have a great day. Have a great holiday.